Hey folks, it's Yannick Gwizdala. It's the Yannick Gwizdala podcast. We're talking about how you, how I, how we might begin to sound like our heroes. I'm going to be using the HX Stomp to do it. I'm launching a new HX Stomp preset pack today called Bass Legends, and I've included a few of my absolute bass and, of course, musical heroes in this collection. I'm going to break down how I hear those people and how those people have had a massive influence on me as a bass player, as a musician, and just throughout my career in general. I'm going to play a few different instruments. I've got a P-bass here with really old flat wound strings. So do you think you could guess who we might be going for first? A massive, massive hero, probably to all of us, regardless of the genre we play. It's not Jaco. Jaco's not on this list. There will be a few people that you go, well, what about, Stanley Clarke? And what about Flea? And what about Geddy Lee and Les Claypool? But of course, all super legitimate bass heroes that we, I'm sure, all love and admire. And maybe there will be Volume 2 and Volume 3, Volume 4 of the Bass Legends preset packs for the HX Stomp. But right now, I picked five people who I think have had a massive influence on me and whose sound I thought I could come somewhat close to replicating for you. If you like or dig any of the sounds you hear in this video, you can get the preset pack. It's linked below in the description of the video. It's for the HX Stomp, the HX Stomp XL, for Line 6 Helix products in general. And yeah, let's go in with number one. Hero number one, it is the lofty Welshman, the king of fretless, and actually the king of kind of everything. It's Pino Palladino. I called the preset Voodoo, and that's because I was really focusing in on that specific part of his career. I wasn't going for the Who. I wasn't going for it like any of the other legendary stuff he's obviously super well known for. I was just listening to Voodoo the other day. It's kind of what kicked this whole idea off. I was like, man, can I replicate that? I have the Stomp on my board. It's what I use for so many elements of my sound. Could I get into Pino's sound? That acoustic 360 amp, I think, is what they used on Voodoo. The LA2A, the classic compressor. Could I get into that vibe somehow? I hope to your ear, the answer is yes. I've got some drum grooves up here, so I'm going to give you some idea of how that sounds in context. I guess what I will do is turn everything in the preset off and let you hear what this P-bass sounds like. That's with all the tone rolled off. Here's with a bunch of tone rolled in. I mean, it is a P-bass. It's a classic sound, right? It's really simple. It's got one volume knob and one tone knob. It doesn't get a lot simpler than that. Already when you roll down the tone, you can sort of get into Pino's world from that time in the mid-90s for when they were making Voodoo with Questlove and all those guys in the studio at Electric Lady Studios in New York. Now, when I bring in the sound, we have, this is without. Now let's engage. A little bit more amp sound, a little bit more boominess, and let's play it with a groove. Actually, I got this groove is about 98 BPM. Thought it might be applicable for this sound to highlight what's going on here. I think it's important to experiment with the tone knob, maybe open some tone up to get some definition. this episode of the podcast will be 19 hours long because it is a ton of fun to just get into it and just go for it. And I will say with these presets, something I learned whilst making them, whilst putting them together, really, really interesting what the tone knob, especially if you just have a P bass, the simplest setup possible, what the tone knob can do for the sound. Ton of range right there. I also put a little bit of, actually I'm going to do it up here on the computer. I put a little bit of modulation. It's incredibly subtle. I guess another thing I should say about all of these presets is yes, aside from the obvious sound qualities and textures that they create, it's so much about the feel. And obviously you won't know that until you plug it in and put it in your stump and get it under your fingers and experiment with it. But that's really the goal here, was about the feel of it and how it kind of shapes the way I want to play, how it pushes me in certain directions that perhaps I wouldn't have thought of before. The things are subtle, the changes, the elements, the building blocks that make up these presets are pretty subtle on their own. Some of them are subtle in combination, like with this modulation, for instance, or without. I mean, it's really subtle, but it's just a little bit of saturation. And it's kind of almost like a boost or something, the tiniest hint of saturation and kind of oomph for the sound. Again, this is like describing architecture by dancing or describing sound by words. It's not really the greatest way to do it. The best way to do it is to really just feel how that sits under your fingers. And when you have an element like the modulation element in this, where I have zero sort of wow and flutter, if you get these presets and you get inside them, you should absolutely experiment with cranking up the warble a little bit. And experimenting with what that does to the sound for you and how it might push you in a even further in another direction you haven't been before. Okay, I'm going to crush through some of these. The next one I've called 55 Christopher, and I've put a pretty detailed explanation of each sound on the product page, so you can go and read that. It's like a mini bio and how I'm thinking about each sound. But this one's really important for me because, for the most part, the bulk of the people I'm going to feature in this Bass Legends pack, for the most part, I heard about them and heard their music and was influenced by them almost exclusively from records. It wasn't until much later that I started to see some of these people live. Some of these people I even know, some of these people I call my friends now. But the initial experience of hearing their music, of hearing their bass playing and having that become a huge influence on me was via records. And this next person, someone I'm very grateful to know personally, to consider a friend, and also very much a hero and a huge influence on my playing, is Tim LaFave. And the big difference for me here, and the reason I called this preset 55 Christopher, is because so much of what I heard of Tim, for me, the first notes and music I heard from Tim was in person. I was in the room. I was at the 55 bar in New York, which the address was 55 Christopher Street. I was there. I was in this tiny room with 50 or 60 other people, sometimes 5 or 6 other people, depending on how good the turnout was there at times, listening to Tim do his thing in a really sort of fruitful and experimental time. We're talking about, with Wayne Krantz, with Keith Carlock, with that trio, in the late 90s, early 2000s, with Boomish, with Rado, later with Donny McCaslin, with Yuri Kane, with so many hugely impactful artists, hugely impactful to me in my music and in my sound. So the big difference, and why I consider Tim a hero and a legend, and why I wanted to include this, why I called it 55 Christopher, is because that is my experience, and it's quite different from some of the other sort of elder statesmen, if you like Pino on this. There are a few elements to this sound. There is a little delay on there, which actually I'll take off for now and get to a bit later. In fact, let's build this one up from the ground. Of course, Tim is known for the OC2. There's obviously the 3-leaf audio, Octava. And a lot of that is just the sub. It's no natural sound of the bass. But so often I would hear Tim roll in the natural sound of the bass, the dry signal, into the OC2 sound. And using a P bass. Not sure whether it was flats or wounds. I'd have to ask him. I don't have a vivid memory of it being one way or the other. And then playing these kind of really angular things. Let's get another drum groove to put that into context. Again, let's work on the tone control. That was kind of halfway. That's maximum tone. Let's roll all the tone out. Another thing I've included in here is kind of a ring mod vibe. Tim was the first. Oh, I got it right here. When I first heard Tim, I think it was probably this pedal right here, the Electro Harmonix Frequency Analyzer. I think he was the first person I heard using that with Wayne Krantz. Maybe he used the Mogofogo ring mod as well, I'm not sure. But I wanted some approximation of that, plus kind of the bit crushing sample rate reduction thing that you've probably heard 1,000 times. And I used to hear him back with Nerve back in the day with Jojo Mayer's band. There was definitely an element of that, some sort of element of synth bass. So I've added that in there. Now, this is something you should really, really experiment with in terms of all the frequencies. You know, the AM frequency is on. You could turn that off, actually. Completely change the sound. And then just move the frequencies around. If you're feeling really adventurous, assign that to an expression pedal and have control over that while you're playing. So many things you can do with that. This is really like a springboard into the creative world of Tim LaFave. And if you know any of those records and the Wayne Krantz stuff and Rada and Donny McCaslin, all those things that I mentioned, you're going to hear some real similarities right there. So that's, you know, it gives it a little bit more poke. And if I go back to playing with the drums again, take all the tone out. Again, I'm having so much fun. I've been having fun over the past few days, putting all this together and jamming out on it. The delay is also there for a reason. So if we have a tempo somewhere around here, 1, 2, 3. just a dotted pattern, gets over the bar a little bit, and even just with the octaver. The trails aren't too long, and the repeated notes aren't too heavy that they muddy the actual bass line, the natural notes that you're playing. But they do add this element. It allows you to play less notes, have more rhythmic interest, interact with the drums in a certain way, perhaps, or if the rest of the band as a whole. Also, you might want to assign tap tempo to this somehow. Maybe you have an external MIDI controller. Maybe you want to give up foot switch 3 here and assign that to tap tempo / tuner. And then you can be right on top of it, just tapping away quarter notes as you play to lock in with the rest of the band. And then you have that. All right, that's Tim Lefebvre in a nutshell, at least of the embryonic stages of beginning to understand, at least, where I hear it and how I hear it and how it's influenced me. That's two people, Pino Palladino and Tim Lefebvre, who are very well known for using the P bass, the Fender bass, passive, flat wounds. These ones are old tape wound strings that are probably about 15 plus years old now, 15, 16 years old. We're going to switch it up. I've called this one Pork Pie Hat. You should immediately, and I unmuted myself there. You should immediately start to know who that's about. What bass legend and hero wears a pork pie hat? I'm just going to tune up a little bit here. And we're going to go to an active bass, kind of a active Fender-ish style bass, because we're into Marcus Miller, Mr. Pork Pie Hat. And the whole idea of this one, there's actually a little bit of reverb on there because you're probably going to know some of those lines. And as you all well know and are well aware, I'm not Mr. Slap Guy, and you may be thinking, wow, Marcus Miller's on this list for you as an influence. Yes, absolutely. Marcus Miller is a huge influence of mine, a massive hero, and for a bunch of ways you may not expect. I think he's one of the most underrated soloists and melodic players on the instrument. I really do. There are moments on the record, Tales, for instance, that are real standout moments for me, and breakthrough moments, light bulb moments in terms of how to play the instrument and how to phrase it and how it can be so melodic. Of course, his work with Miles, his work with everyone is just incredible. Maybe we can just admit that, like, basically everything he does kind of turns to gold, if you ask me. There's always something to learn by listening to Marcus Miller. And I just, the parts of my career where I have had to play slap, where someone has unfortunately asked, hey man, can you do that Marcus Miller thing? Yes, I guess to a certain extent I can, do not obviously nothing like Marcus Miller. And I have done that, and I've just not really talked about it. And it's on recordings, they're out there, and I never really, just never chose to make a big thing about it because it's so not what I do. But the few times I've had to do that, I'm immediately like, oh shit, let me go to the amp or the EQ or the bass and dial in this frequency and that frequency, more lows, more highs, less mids, that kind of thing. So I was like, maybe I can get that straight up, just on a single preset. So when I press a button, boom, here we are. So this is my RKM 5-string. And of course, again, there are so many things to keep in mind here when you're going through such extreme presets, like really different sounds and different, based on different players, and using different instruments. The output of each instrument is going to be different. The gain structure changes. I did do the Marcus one around an active bass. I think I was using this one when I did it. So you can hear. You can hear basically where it's at. Now, if I get into the sound, we're not going to use the reverb just yet. we're talking about a massive difference of tone. Kind of everything's popping out there. Now, I would also on this one, like that my tone is fully open. The EQ, now we're going to move into some different instruments. This one has an EQ. It is an active instrument. Everything is totally flat. I wanted to make these presets as kind of even as possible in terms of your experience, the end user experience. You're definitely going to have to tweak little things here and there to suit you, to suit a room you're playing in, a musical situation, a sound, a band, an amp that you might be playing this into. So there will be minor adjustments to be made. But the one thing I did do, aside from leaving everything flat, was open the tone wide up to get that kind of top end, that shimmer on it. And there we go with I want to drop in the reverb there. That's actually on foot switch 3. So when I want, I'm actually vocabulary-wise getting more into Patitucci there, but the sound, that's kind of how I hear Marcus's thing, and I think that was influenced by Stanley Clarke. So you might be sitting there thinking, oh, that kind of sounds a little bit like Stanley as well. Absolutely. I think there's a massive, I've heard Marcus talk about it in interviews, how he transcribed this one Stanley Clarke thing and tried to play it on every single solo or something, you know, the kind of thing you do when you're young. Before you find your own voice. So I think there's definitely an influence there. So you can trace that lineage back to Stanley. And of course, all the Larry Graham stuff. There's so many areas and parts of history you could go back to identify the sound. But again, this is all about kind of how I hear it, how I have heard it over the years, and how I have attempted to add these sounds to this pack, so that, of course, you may experience it, and also so that I kind of have those if I ever need that option, just to step on one button or load up one preset and go, oh, you know what? I don't have to change all the EQ and stuff on my instrument. I kind of have this. It's funny just to, I don't think I've ever played that until right this second. What is that? Power. That's that tune that everyone plays. But obviously I've heard it a bunch of times, and it's just funny to hear that coming from my fingers. That's a bizarre thing. But it is super fun. Again, in the room, it's something that's pretty inspiring to play to. I wonder what I have here. No. Oh. Okay, well, that's just about enough slap for the next decade for me. But that's my attempt at Marcus. The preset is called Pork Pie Hat. Let's see where we go here. I was going to do... Yeah, let's do Victor next. This is called Show of Hands. Obviously because of his now iconic Show of Hands album from, I think, 1996, February 1996, I believe that came out. If you're a fan of Vic or a fan of that album, I'm sure it was life-changing for you. It definitely was for me. And it's something, while everyone was sort of gravitating towards I think the second track on the record, You Ain't Got No Groove. You can't hold no groove, you ain't got no pocket, something like that. Really long title, actually. And then, of course, like Classical Thump, like things that became kind of iconic through the bass community, things that stepped up the world of technique and possibilities and the amount of things you could do as a complete soloist with the instrument really changed with that record in a big way, I think. And a lot of people gravitated towards those two tracks. Meanwhile, I was way more inspired and enamored with this. I just remember this ridiculously beautiful reverb and this shimmer of his sound. Again, tone wide open. This is an active bass. I guess Vic was playing his Fodera back then, so that was active. I'd have to ask him about that, exactly what the setup was. That would be interesting, actually, to see how close I got to it. And the little thing I mentioned earlier on about hearing Marcus talk about having transcribed Stanley Clarke and trying to squeeze that idea, that maybe even an entire solo, into everything he ever did. Man, when I heard these notes, I did that on every single gig for way too long. I did every time there was a major 7 chord. Every time there was a major 7 chord, I was using that voicing, no matter what. And sometimes it was beautiful and it was totally applicable. Sometimes it was dreadful, but just to give you an idea of how much of an influence that had on me, it was huge. It means a lot to me to be able to include it here. In fact, I think I'm going to switch basses and keep the sound. We'll do a little bit on the Matheson, just because our final hero in the preset pack. Tune this bass a little bit as well. I definitely did our final hero on this bass because it was way closer to my thing, and I think even though this bass isn't active, it did it a little better service to my ear. So if I open up, oops, here we go, and maybe just front pickup and full tone, no, back pickup full tone, or maybe both pickups. Yeah, maybe both pickups. We're in a little bit of a different world here. This is now a passive bass. But I just wanted to do that to make an example of the fact that it does translate. It translates to different basses, and of course you could do it with the P bass as well, but this one has flats on it, so that's a really quite a different sound, even though some of the characteristics will remain the same. And did I mention the name of that song? That was called The Vision. That was the track. I forget which one it is, 5 or 6 or something. It's sort of well into the record by a few tracks, and just I've always been enamored with that sound and that element of Vic's melodicism. Again, a guy who's really well known for slap and sort of, wizardry level technique, and kind of underrated in terms of the gigs I know he's done, and I have bootlegs of, and some of them I've even seen, with Vic with Chick Corea, Vic with Mike Stern, people who require a lot. I was going to say a lot more. It's not a lot more. It's maybe a lot more variation. Let's say that. And for sure, they require fingers. They require sort of the bass in its more traditional role in that sense with fingerstyle. So I think that's an underrated and often overlooked part of Vic's contribution to the instrument, and something I've always been very, very enamored with. And it may come as no surprise that our fifth candidate here, as I pick up this instrument, is that was just a horrible rendition of Got a Match, but it's John Patitucci. And I've called it Electric Solo because there's a period of John's sound back in the Electric Band in the 80s, just up until he switched from the Ken Smith to the Yamaha. And even then, some of the characteristics remain because it's obviously his sound. But there's that sound that's been kind of gone for a long time. And I think this preset helps capture a little bit of that, and then well into the 90s in terms of the reverb I've added here, a little bit of compression, the amp sound, just kind of And you can always go to the front pickup if you want his more recent sound. Yeah. Yeah. Kind of that one to me is like more the that's a little bit more kind of dialed in. Where am I at? I'm kind of half tone and both pickups flat out. It's got a little bit of squeeze on it from the compression. Yeah, just took me a while to get that one dialed in, but that's kind of where I hear John's sound from a very specific period of his playing. That's not how it sounds today. His instrument choices have changed over the years. Some fascinating periods with the hollow body, with the guitar quartet. Obviously he has such a distinct sound on both upright and electric, and there are periods of his upright playing where it's really changed, from Chick Corea acoustic trio through. There are just so many hundreds of albums that you could list with him on, and he has so many of his own as well. I think when it got into the mid to late 90s, kind of around One More Angel, and there with Paul Motian and Alan Pasqua and Chris Potter, and then into the Now record with Bill Stewart and Schofield and Chris Potter, I heard the upright sound changing, getting a little fatter there. And you hear the electric on those records as well, overdubbed, playing melodies. And to me, that's as a fan, as a listener, that's a huge transitional period in John's sound. All sort of heading towards the Brooklyn album, I forget the names of all the records in order. Sorry. I should know that better. I'm not in full research mode right now like I was for the interview earlier this year, but you guys can go listen, and I encourage you to listen to how that sound changed over the years, from Heart of the Bass, from On the Corner, from John Patitucci, from all of those early records, from the Chick Corea Electric Band albums. And I'm sure you can find him on like Lee Ritenour records and GRP All-Star recordings. There's just so many different places you can hear that sound and reference it and hear how it changes. And yeah, so that was it. That's my 5 contributions of bass heroes to the lexicon of HX Stomp presets. They're all, like I said, available below in a new little pack. I've updated the complete collection bundle to include those. So now there are over 20 presets in that complete collection now. So if you don't have any of them, there are a ton more in there besides the bass specific hero presets, lots of synth bass, lots of kind of studio presets, my signature sounds. And I think maybe the most important thing I leave you with today is, if I had to choose, if I had to say, hey, can you please take this one thing away, and here we go. If you stayed this long, drop me an ear emoji in your comment, especially if you have a question. And if you drop me an ear emoji, it'll tell me that you listened this long. I really appreciate you spending time with me. And if you drop an ear emoji in the comment, I'll definitely read it. And if you have a question, I'll definitely answer your question. But the one thing I would love to leave you with today is the importance of listening. And whether you consider me to have gotten close to how you hear these fine bass players, heroes of all of ours, I'm sure, or whether you think I did a lousy job or it's just nothing like you heard it, or maybe you hear it now in the video or on the podcast and you think, I don't know about that, and then you get to feel it and you're like, now I understand, and you make the connection between how important the feel is. It doesn't matter. The most important thing is to be listening. Is to have critical thought, is to have an opinion, is to know what you love, is to be curious. And when that curiosity is driven and fueled by listening, You improve your musicianship without even having to pick up the instrument, whatever instrument it is you play. I think that's often overlooked these days and is an immensely important part of our process that we should talk more about. Whether you're a casual fan, it's always nice to have better understanding of what it is you listen to. Whether you're a fan of great architecture and you know a little bit about, but then you read a book and you understand the history of that architect and the time period that it was happening in and why the thing looks like that and why it was designed the way it was designed. I think it's the same with music, and you don't necessarily have to read books about the music, although that is amazing too. Just accruing many, many, many hours of listening is an important part of the process, no matter where you sit on the spectrum of casual fan, avid fan, just a listener, or whether you're a player and whether you're someone who's trying to develop something as a musician, maybe trying to develop a voice. I think there's probably no more important thing than listening to as much as you can and fueling your curiosity on a daily basis, keeping that muscle active. If you don't use it, you lose it. And the listening and curiosity muscle will atrophy if you don't get into it on a regular basis. So that's it. Once again, thank you immensely for spending some time with me. Listening to these presets, talking about music, talking about the bass, getting into the HX Stomp as a tool to, yes, perhaps sound a little bit like our heroes, but also to get inside their process and get access to their sort of creative direction when it comes to building some of these iconic sounds. All right, I'll see you.